So this is a follow-up to my last video talking about the high prevalence of autism and Asperger's in Silicon Valley. And again, I'm going to say up front, I'm not trying to go after, because I've taken care of many people that fall on the spectrum. Okay, so I know that they have struggles. What my point is trying to say is that are there people that are heading up the biggest of technology industries, okay, that just lack empathy, period. Because not all people on the spectrum, they'll have empathy, but it's in a different way. Okay, so it's not right to put them in the category of psychopathy. But if you had most of people heading up technology, that every time I listen to them, they lack empathy. They do. Okay, I mean, it's the same problem that even though this world wants to promote Yuval Noah Harari, the man said that human beings are useless eaters, okay? And he's a human being, I mean, as far as we know. I mean, sort of, I guess. I mean, but he clearly lacks empathy. But you listen to him, these higher educated people listen to him and think, oh, he sounds so brilliant. Yeah. Do you just blank over the fact that he called human beings useless eaters? That there's no, but that's what Silicon Valley is very much about, is that I don't know if it's a need in people that, want to find their silicon god, their metal god. I don't know. But what bothers me about this whole industry is they're pushing it on everyone, that the rest of us need to fall in line, because they decided, no, AI is already, the cat's out of the box, nobody's going to stop it, it's better than you. That's what bothers me about these people. So Trump's put him in his administration, okay, so that's not great in my opinion. It's not, because and it's fine if you want to put people with autism and Asperger's in place, but you need to balance it out. You need to. That's part of the problem with Silicon Valley, is then they want to be the fixers of everything, and yet when you have just people that have no empathy creating all of this software that they say is going to change everybody's life, and all it's done is create more of a police state system we live under, and it's taking more care out of health care and the very people heading up healthcare are no different than the people in Silicon Valley themselves, then there's a problem. You don't have a balance of having people with true empathy and people that, okay, they're better at the tech world. They're better at software and coding than I am. I wouldn't begin to know any of that. But what they don't have, I do have, which is empathy. You need to have a balance. So at the end of my last video, I brought this book up. There was an article in 2015 that brought this book up, okay? And the article was on CBS News, The Massive Reset, which is in quotes, massive reset needed in how we think about autism. And that's what this book says. Okay, so when Steve Silberman, who's the author, was a reporter covering Silicon Valley in the early 2000s, he noticed what seemed like a common thread in the families of many tech executives, children diagnosed with autism. He researched the medical literature and spoke with the families and recognized he was onto something. Documented rates of autism in children were rapidly rising during the time, particularly in the communities of Silicon Valley elite. Silberman's story for Wired magazine, called The Geek Syndrome, also considered a genetic predisposition toward autism in people who are drawn to mathematical or methodological work. After the story ran, there was this outpouring of responses from parents of autistic children. Doctors and other readers left Silberman with a nagging feeling that the story was even bigger than he realized. Soon, national statistics confirmed the increase in autism diagnoses everywhere. In 2001, 1 in 150 children was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. By 2010, the latest report figures 1 in 68 had received a diagnosis, with rates expected to continue to rise. Even before then, advocates and parents had begun to raise the idea that autism could be a modern-day epidemic. The alarm increased awareness and helped spark research aimed at finding a cure. So he goes into how they're not doing that, though. Of course, the science isn't. I mean, but and he's not advocating like what I'm trying to say. He's advocating that many of these people that are high on the autism spectrum, they even as adults, they will need help for the rest of their life. And what happens when their parents are gone? And there's a problem here. So we need to get, like, it's truly an epidemic, especially for people that will need that help. What are they going to do? So what I'm saying, he's not saying, but what he goes on to talk about is this whole history of autism. And it says here about the book, The Legacy of Autism and the Future of Neurodiversity, suggests that thinking about autism as an epidemic is a deal with the devil. For decades, autism was completely ignored, primarily because it was perceived to be so rare. So when the notion that it is an epidemic came along, that seemed like it was a good deal, because it was like that's the way to sound the alarm. The problem with that mindset, he said, is that it renders previous generations of autistic people who, by the way, are still here and still need help. Silberman spent 5 years gathering reports, studies, and archival information on the often obscured and dark history of autism spectrum disorder. He looked at the fraught evolution of autism research and the changes in cultural acceptance over the 7 decades since autism. The more that I looked, the more I dug into the history, the farther back I kept going to try to figure out when things sort of went wrong. Neuro Tribes presents an Edison-Tesla-like competition for credit between two of the founding researchers on autism, Hans Asperger's, whose name is now associated with many that are called high-functioning autism, first developed his theories about autism in the 1930s. Asperger believed the condition was not uncommon and could include a range of symptoms on a continuum, but he was caught in Nazi-controlled Austria and therefore written off unfairly, from what this author says. He was written off as a sympathizer or an enabler of the cruel Nazi eugenics experiments, which claimed some autistic children in his clinics. Around the same time, American child psychiatrist Leo Kanner took a very different view of the condition, which he first dubbed Kanner syndrome. Kanner focused on more extreme cases and believed the disorder was rare, a product of poor environments and the kind of deviant psychologies that Freud had described. Silberman relates how Kanner was likely influenced by other research in the field, including Asperger's, but never acknowledged their theories. Mid-20th century ideas that autism was caused by toxic parenting from unloving refrigerated mothers and hyper-competitive fathers led to shame and guilt and many abandoned children. Autistic children were often either undiagnosed or, in more pronounced cases, put in institutions where they deteriorated both mentally and physically. It was an absolute epic tragedy for generations, parents being told by clinicians, "I'm sorry, this is a fate worse than death, but you must somehow learn to accept it." It wasn't until the 1980s and 90s that the shift toward diagnosing a wider range of spectrum disorders gained momentum. And then with the movie Rain Man, he talks about. Then he goes on to say here, we've been looking at autism for more than 70 years. Do we really not understand why the numbers went up so much in the 90s? Many things are being ignored by going after the cause of the alleged epidemic that many not even be one. That's what he says. It just doesn't make sense. I didn't understand that at first. He's basically saying without enough research, how do we even know there is an epidemic of this? And there hasn't been much of studies done among autism in adults. But it's prevalent wide in Silicon Valley and their children.